Yeah, that thumbnail is just clickbait. We're actually going to do the front struts on this Caravan. What's up, YouTube? So I figured, yeah, I'll show you the front brakes and sway bar links and bushings on this WRX instead of that front strut Caravan job. You know, it's homebrew Subaru, so we'll get this WRX going. If you watched the previous video of the bad vibration, it was a quick and easy find to see that the right front caliper's hanging up on this car, and so I've got a pair of calipers and hoses to put back on, and that should cure his issue. And because he's burned up the pads a bit, the front pads and rotors aren't actually that old, but the right side is burned up a little bit, so I'm going to put a new set of front pads on as well. So yeah, I'll get the car back up on stands and get the front wheels off, and we'll get to work. Because I'm doing calipers with the pads, I can just pretty much get rid of all this with the hose and everything, all one shot. But I don't want to leak out too much fluid. But I'll start with the hose over here. I could tell the 12 point of this boxed end part of the wrench was about to slip, so I've got a 3/8 socket on there, 6 point, and we're gonna see if my little gun can snap it out of there. Because it's just tight. It's just even my chrome thin wall 1/2 inch socket could just barely get in there. I didn't want to start to hop off of the head of the bolt. And now that I just set the caliper back there, I just cracked this line, and that'll be all pretty much ready to go. It's always best to have a line wrench when taking off brake lines. Sometimes the flex hose will start to go past this catch, and it'll actually start to spin in there. So you may have to hold on to it with some vice grips. But I find if the line isn't too rotten, and it's going to come apart with little effort, that usually doesn't happen, and the hose doesn't spin in the bracket, just like that. Make sure the fitting is spinning fully on the line and you're not twisting the line. And then once I have it loose, I'll take out the clip. Just give things a quick wipe down here so we don't get anything falling down into the line and pushing up into the new hose. And they just come apart almost like new. So you kind of want to move quickly here. Get your old hose out of the way. Get the new hose in place. Thread the line back up in there. Aim your hose down towards your drain pan. Let some of the fluid start coming through, gravity bleeding it. Finish snugging up the line. As you can see, we got some fluid dripping out of the end of the hose already, which is kind of nice. Make sure your master cylinder has plenty of fluid in it. This is the proper tool to pinch a flex hose. It takes very little pressure. You want something with some rounded edges, not a pair of these. And once you get some pretty fluid, decent amount of fluid to drip out of it, you can just slowly tighten it up. This way you can continue working and the hose all flapping around and you're not going to make a mess, or have to continue filling the master while you work. So we take our clip and we'll just bang the clip back into place, and then just double check your fitting. Make sure it is good and snug. Everything seems to sit rather nicely. Well, first let's get this old caliper out of here. Which you should be seeing these in a future episode. So we got our brand new bracket, and I'm just going to lube up these shims. Remember not to get too much on there because it just bleeds its way onto the brakes. So just a nice thin skim of it is good. Brakes are supposed to have regular maintenance, and if this isn't done regularly, that's when pads end up seizing in the bracket. Now anti-seize. I tend not to use it often, but on these bolts, because they're getting ready to be required for replacement, the next time the brakes are done, they might not come apart. So especially in and around this inner side is where I really want to get it, because that's where they're really seizing up bad, because the threads are rather clean. And this just may assist the next person to do it, whether it's myself or not, to be able to get them off. And I'll put the cleanest head up top because it's the more difficult bolt to get out. So I couldn't actually start the bolt on this side, and I realized, well, it's already got a curled thread in it. How nice is that? And that's what you get with Chinese quality. Fortunately, I have thread chasers. So yeah, I've run a thread chaser through the holes. The bolts seem to be going in. Actually, the pins all, even though they put this lube in there, I'll just kind of spread it around a little better. Sometimes I put a little more on if I feel that they're too dry. Sometimes they sit on the shelf for too long and the grease actually hardens up in them a little bit. So now we're ready for our set of pads. When they rest in there, they should slip in and out quite easily. Have some free movement. They shouldn't bind at all. A lot of cheap aftermarket pads will have way too much paint built up onto the ends here, and you actually have to grind some of it off or file it off to make that nice smooth travel in there. There shouldn't be so much play that the pad will actually chatter up and down, but it should be able to move freely in and out. We got our new caliper to install. You want to make sure these slider pins lined up with their flat edges along these locking points inside the caliper there. You can always straighten them out later, but you can see when you first go on, they almost line up right away. The caliper bolts up. A lot of times I find caliper bolts over tightened. A lot of people smash them in with a gun. Now we need to get the banjo bolt from the old caliper so I can install this flex hose. And I got the banjo bolt out of the old caliper, and we got our new crush washers. We'll slip one on the outside, one on the inside of the banjo fitting. Line up the fitting through the tangs sticking out of the caliper. And you always want to tighten these by hand. You could do it with an air ratchet, but you shouldn't be using a gun to do that. And now that all the hydraulics are hooked up, we're going to crack the bleeder and let it start pushing the air out of the caliper. Here comes the fluid. If you have a painted caliper, you don't really want to do this. Brake fluid will take the paint right off the caliper in no time. You see a lot of the top air bubbles coming out there. The way to get away from this is to keep the bleeder screw in and then put a hose on the end of the bleeder screw and let it kind of hang away from the caliper. But honestly, if you're bleeding brakes, you're probably going to get some brake fluid on the caliper. And I'll leave it like that just for now until I can get the other side together and do it, and then do some vacuum bleeding on both sides and possible pressure bleeding. So I'm not going to go through the entire brake bleeding process with you, but I will show you basically how this vacuum bleeder works. You hook it up to the brake bleeder and you hook up your air line on the other end of it, and as you pull the trigger, it will siphon off the line and cause the vacuum to pull on the fluid and start drawing any of the air and fluid through the line and into this reservoir. We're running, I just cracked it loose a little bit. Beforehand, you should be gravity bleeding your brakes and letting them drip for a while and making sure there's good amount of fluid coming through the system. If the vacuum bleeding doesn't work for you, then you may have to resort to pressure bleeding, or just come back and vacuum bleed again, and eventually you get a really good pedal. The idea is you just need all the air out of the system. Air is compressible, hydraulic fluid is not. So I just finished road testing that car, and what a huge difference. The car also seems to make more power, and obviously with the brake hanging up on it, it's going to always be holding back on letting it go. And now that the wheel is actually freewheeling and moving without being held all the time by the caliper, the car just, picks up and goes the way it's supposed to, and the pedal feels the way it should. It doesn't get all rock hard. And I did happen to mention that you'll see those calipers in another episode at some point. I did pay out on the cores for those, and I did buy rebuild kits. So I'm basically going to try and rebuild those calipers for a very reasonable price, and they'll probably end up making their way onto the wagon, and then the wagon would have full set of Bugeye WRX brakes front and rear. I know the Forester has a bit of a sticky caliper, and I'm kind of hoping that the calipers that are on the wagon now, which are from a legacy Outback, will be a straight swap over to the Forester, because the Forester pads and rotors are probably in really decent shape, but I just know that caliper's been it doesn't work so well. So I have the car's parked and I don't really need brakes for it, so they're just kind of something that'll kick around until I don't have anything else to do. As usual, that's going to do it for this time. If you haven't already, hit that subscribe button, and if you like this video, definitely give it a thumbs up. Leave your questions and comments down below, and I'll see you in the next one.